Beneath the Mediterranean's shimmering waves lies a secret waiting for 3,000 years, a puzzle carved into the timbers of forgotten ships, left behind by the greatest sailors the ancient world ever knew. The Phoenicians, masters of the sea, whose voyages stretched from the rocky coasts of Lebanon to the distant shores of Britain and beyond, didn't just trade goods. They carried something far more mysterious: 25 cryptic codes etched into pottery, hidden in cargo holds and scrawled on sunken hulls. These aren't mere scratches or random marks. They're deliberate, intricate, and until now utterly indecipherable. What were they hiding? A map to lost treasures, a forgotten language, or something even more startling: proof of voyages history never recorded? Picture this: a storm brewing off the coast of modern-day Turkey, waves crashing against a ship's hull as sailors scramble to secure their cargo. In a desperate act, someone grabs a shard of pottery and carves a series of symbols, a last message, a warning, or perhaps a clue. Centuries later, divers brush away layers of sand and silt, and there it is, a code that hasn't been read in millennia. This isn't just one shipwreck. It's a trail of breadcrumbs left across the Mediterranean, each fragment holding a piece of a story we're only beginning to unravel, and the implications. They could rewrite everything we thought we knew about the ancient world's most enigmatic traders. But here's what makes these codes truly extraordinary. The Phoenicians didn't just dominate trade, they invented the alphabet we use today. So why would these master communicators, the very people who gave us the foundation of modern writing, resort to secrecy? Were they protecting trade routes, hiding the locations of untold riches, or guarding knowledge that could shake the foundations of history? Join me as we dive into the depths of this mystery, piecing together clues from shipwrecks, deciphered fragments, and the whispers of long-lost sailors. By the time we're done, you'll see the ancient Mediterranean not as a static map in a history book, but as a living, breathing world of spies, explorers, and secrets waiting to be uncovered. The codes are speaking. It's time we listened. The first of these enigmatic codes surfaced just off the coast of Byblos, the very city where the Phoenician alphabet may have been born. Divers excavating a wreck from the 10th century before Common Era stumbled upon a clay tablet, its surface covered in symbols unlike anything found before. These weren't Phoenician letters, nor were they hieroglyphs or cuneiform. Instead, they formed a zigzagging pattern of lines, dots, and half-moon shapes, some stacked vertically, others clustered like constellations. At first glance, it seemed random, but the precision of the markings told a different story. This was a deliberate cipher, and whoever carved it meant for it to be understood. But only by the right eyes. Archaeologists initially thought it might record a cargo manifest, listing goods like Tyrian purple dye or Lebanese cedar. But the symbols didn't match known numerical systems, and their arrangement was too intricate for simple accounting. Then came another theory: religion. Byblos was a sacred hub, home to the temple of Bolat Jebel, where priests communed with the gods. Could this tablet be a prayer, or perhaps instructions for a ritual lost to time? The mystery deepened when researchers noticed identical symbols on broken pottery scattered across shipwrecks from Cyprus to Sardinia, like a network of hidden messages spanning the entire Mediterranean. What's truly astonishing is how this code defies translation. Modern cryptographers have tried everything from frequency analysis to comparing it with ancient shorthand systems, but the Byblos Cipher resists all attempts. Some symbols resemble celestial maps, hinting at navigation secrets. Others repeat in sequences that suggest names or locations, possibly untapped ports or trading partners history forgot. And there's one chilling possibility: these marks might not be meant for humans at all. In Phoenician myths, messages were sometimes carved for the gods, tossed into the sea as offerings. Could this tablet be a plea for safe passage, hurled into the waves as a storm closed in? The wreck where it was found offers eerie clues. The ship's hull showed signs of fire, and nearby lay a pile of charred figurines, likely idols meant to protect the vessel. Was the tablet a last-ditch effort to ward off disaster, or did it survive because it was the one thing on board too valuable to destroy? As the debate rages on, one thing is clear: this isn't just a relic. It's a whisper from the deep, daring us to listen. And if we ever crack its code, it might reveal secrets far older than the ship that carried it. Theories about the Byblos Cipher split sharply between the practical and the sacred, a divide that mirrors the Phoenicians themselves, at once shrewd merchants and devout worshippers. On one side, scholars like Dr. Elias Maroun of the University of Beirut argue the symbols represent a merchant's encrypted ledger. This was a culture that built its wealth on trade secrets, he notes. Tyrian purple dye alone required harvesting thousands of mollusks for a single gram. If competitors deciphered their routes or suppliers, entire cities could lose their advantage. The cipher's repeating clusters, he suggests, might code quantities of cedar wood, olive oil, or even the coveted glass beads Phoenician craftsmen perfected. Yet others, like archaeologist Dr. Layla Farsi, point to Byblos's spiritual heartbeat. The city wasn't just a port, it was a pilgrimage site where temples overflowed with votive offerings. We found identical symbols on amulets buried in shrine foundations, she explains. Patterns this precise often served as divine receipts, proving a gift was given to the gods. The half-moon shapes she proposes could represent the lunar goddess Tanit, while the zigzag lines mirror sacred rivers in underworld myths. The wreck itself fuels both theories. The ship carried not only burnt figurines but also ingots of copper, a cargo that blurred commerce and ritual. In Phoenician society, metals were both currency and consecrated objects, smelted into idols as easily as coins. Could the cipher be a hybrid, a way to tally goods while invoking protection? Maritime historian Dr. Rafael Guevara offers a tantalizing middle ground. Think of it as an ancient bill of lading with a prayer attached. These sailors knew the sea was unpredictable. Marking your cargo with sacred symbols might have been like insuring it with the divine. Then there's the wildcard theory. The cipher isn't words or numbers at all, but music. Folklorists note that certain symbol sequences match rhythmic patterns in traditional Levantine sea shanties, songs sailors used to coordinate rowing or soothe storms. If true, the tablet could be a nautical score, a way to carry melodies across waters where language failed. What unites these theories is their boldness. The Phoenicians didn't just leave us a code. They left a mirror reflecting a world where prophet and prayer, calculation and incantation were woven into the same sailcloth. And until we crack it, the Byblos Cipher remains both ledger and liturgy, waiting in the silence of the deep. Near the ancient harbor of Tyre, where waves still whisper against stone docks built by King Hiram himself, divers made a discovery that stopped historians in their tracks: a 2-ton stone anchor, its surface etched with symbols so deliberate they seemed to hum with hidden meaning. Unlike the scattered codes of Byblos, this inscription was carved with the weight of ceremony, each groove worn smooth not by time, but by hands that traced its lines again and again. Anchors like this were the lifelines of Phoenician ships, but this one wasn't just a tool. It was a relic bearing marks that blurred the line between navigation and necromancy. Preserved in startling detail, the anchor's symbols spiral around a central groove where ropes once bit into the stone. At first glance, they look like waves or fish scales, fitting for a seafaring culture. But look closer and patterns emerge: serpentine loops echoing Mesopotamian storm gods, crossed lines resembling the Ankh of Egyptian pharaohs, even what might be a crude map of Tyre's twin harbors. Most haunting is the repeating trident motif, a symbol later stolen by Poseidon, but here it's carved with a reverence that suggests something deeper. The anchor now rests in the Beirut National Museum, displayed beside a reconstruction of the ship it once steadied. curators noticed something peculiar. The symbols clustered near the anchor's crown, precisely where sailors would have touched it most. Not random wear, but devotional polish, maritime archaeologist Dr. Youssef Haddad explains. This wasn't just inscribed, it was blessed. Phoenicians believed anchors held souls between worlds. Their weight kept ships from drifting into the realm of the dead. Ritual texts from Ugarit describe anchors being anointed with oil and honey before voyages, and this one's markings match descriptions of sea prayers meant to bind a ship to the living. Yet one symbol defies all parallels, a 7-pointed star nested inside a circle, its rays ending in tiny drilled holes. X-rays revealed flecks of gold still embedded in those holes, proving they once held inlays, perhaps gems or sacred metals. Stars were celestial guides, but 7 was the Phoenicians' mystic number, representing the pillars of Melkart's temple. Could this anchor have been a portable shrine? Or something darker? In Sidon, funeral steels show anchors chained to corpses, weighting them against resurrection. The Tyre anchor's true power might lie in its duality. By day, a tool for trade, by night, an object of terror and awe. Sailors knew the sea's cruelty, how easily a snapped rope could turn this stone into a tombstone. So they carved into it not just a code, but a covenant: hold us fast, keep us from the depths. 3,000 years later, in the museum's hushed light, those same symbols still seem to murmur their ancient plea. Deciphering the Tyre anchor's cryptic symbols became a linguistic battleground where centuries-old inscriptions collided with cutting-edge technology. The breakthrough came when a team from the University of Barcelona noticed similarities between the anchor's spiral patterns and votive texts found in the ruins of Carthage. Both shared a peculiar trait: symbols clustered in groups of 3, a rhythm that matched Phoenician poetic meter. Using these fragments as a Rosetta Stone, linguists tentatively translated one repeating phrase as steadfast as the mountain, a likely reference to the sacred peak of Zaphon, where the storm god Baal was believed to dwell. But the victory was partial, like hearing every third word of a whispered secret. The real controversy erupted over the anchor's missing fragments. Nearly a quarter of its surface had crumbled away, leaving gaps that some researchers filled with speculative reconstructions. Dr. Amenakolov's team proposed the lost sections contained navigational coordinates, arguing the 7-pointed star aligned with the Pleiades, a constellation Phoenicians used for nighttime sailing. Yet critics pointed out the star's uneven rays made celestial alignment impossible. "You can't force a puzzle piece where it doesn't fit," countered epigrapher Dr. Marco Conti, who believed the gaps held ritual curses common in maritime artifacts to deter thieves. His theory gained traction when infrared scans revealed traces of mercury beneath the symbols, a metal ancients associated with binding oaths and the underworld. Then came the wild card, a pottery shard dredged from the same bay, bearing the same 7-pointed star but paired with a sequence of vertical slashes. Carbon dated to the same era, it ignited debates over whether these were tally marks counting voyages or something far grimmer, prisoner counts from slave ships. Here, the Phoenicians' own legacy complicated the work. As inventors of the alphabet, their standard letters were well documented, but these symbols predated standardized writing, harking back to a time when each city-state used its own cipher. The anchor's code might not be a language at all, but a visual dialect, a sailor's shorthand lost when scribes replaced symbols with letters. What's undeniable is the emotional weight these markings carried. However incomplete, their translation paints a world where every voyage was a pact between the living and the divine. The anchor wasn't just a tool, it was a covenant carved in stone, shouting across millennia, "We were here." The sea did not take us without a fight. In the heart of Sidon's royal necropolis, where Phoenician kings once ruled the waves, archaeologists unearthed an artifact so fragile it seemed to defy time itself. A scroll of pure silver, thinner than a petal, coiled tightly like a sleeping serpent. Unlike stone anchors or clay tablets, this delicate relic bore inscriptions pressed into its malleable surface, a code whispered in precious metal meant only for the eyes of rulers. Preserved in the oxygen-starved depths of a sealed tomb, the scroll survived millennia, but with a cruel twist. Unrolling it risked turning centuries of patina into dust. The scroll's discovery came by accident during the excavation of a 5th century before Common Era burial chamber. Grave robbers had looted the gold and jewels, but overlooked a small lead box tucked beneath the sarcophagus. Inside, the silver sheet shimmered faintly, its edges fused together by corrosion. Initial X-rays revealed rows of tiny characters, not Phoenician script, but a derivative cipher with elongated symbols resembling royal seals from Byblos. Some scholars believe it records a king's secret edict, perhaps naming a taboo successor or detailing alliances too volatile for papyrus. Others argue the metal itself holds the clue. Silver was sacred to Astarte, goddess of Sidon, and temple inventories mention moon metal scrolls used to record prophecies. Unrolling the scroll became a technological chess match. Traditional methods would have peeled away layers like an onion's skin, so conservators turned to synchrotron imaging, a particle accelerator that scans artifacts with pinpoint X-ray beams. What emerged was a puzzle within a puzzle. The text spiraled inward in concentric circles, a format seen only in Mesopotamian temple hymns. Yet the language defied translation, mixing archaic Phoenician roots with loanwords from Anatolian and Egyptian. One repeating cluster, resembling a ship's mast crossed with an eye, appears in no other known inscriptions. Then came the shocker. Spectral analysis detected minuscule traces of myrrh and cedar oil embedded in the silver substances used in royal embalming. This wasn't just a document, it was a funerary object likely interred with a king to guide him in the afterlife. The scroll's circular text might mirror the Phoenician belief in eternal cyclical journeys, both for ships at sea and souls in the underworld. Today, the scroll remains partially coiled, its full message still locked in metal. But even fragmented, it rewrites history. Most ancient codes served commerce or religion. This one, it smells of power, mortality, and the whispered deals that kept kingdoms afloat. Every scratch on that silver sheet is a crack in the door, letting us glimpse the Phoenicians not just as traders, but as puppet masters of politics, their codes as vital to empire as their ships. The Silver Scroll's ties to King Eshmunazar II aren't just speculation, they're etched in stone. Literally, in the very same necropolis where the scroll was found, a sarcophagus bears the king's name alongside a curse so severe, it chilled even the archaeologists who uncovered it. May whoever opens this tomb find no rest among the shades. Eshmunazar ruled Sidon during its golden age, a time when Phoenician influence stretched from Cyprus to the Nile Delta, but his reign was shrouded in intrigue. Historical records mention a sudden power vacuum after his death, with rival city-states scrambling to claim Sidon's shipping lanes. Could this scroll hold the key to that chaos? The tomb's inscriptions offer tantalizing clues. One weathered slab describes Eshmunazar as keeper of the sacred word, a title previously unseen in Phoenician texts. Even more telling are the symbols flanking his name, a 7-pointed star identical to the one on the silver scroll, and a looping cipher resembling the anchor markings from Tyre. This wasn't just decorative. In Phoenician royal tradition, repeating symbols across artifacts functioned like a signature, a way to authenticate decrees. The scroll's metal, thinner than parchment yet more durable, suggests it was meant to survive not for the living but for the gods. Now imagine the scroll's unrolling process, not as a simple unfurling but as a technological ballet. Synchrotron imaging revealed the text's spiral pattern, each concentric circle pressing closer like the grooves of a vinyl record. At the center, a single symbol, a ship with oars raised, a Phoenician funerary motif meaning voyage complete. But here's where it gets eerie. That same ship appears on Eshmunazar's sarcophagus, floating above a line of text calling him the uniter of shores. Some scholars argue this was metaphorical, praising his trade networks. Others, like Dr. Selma Kadri, propose something darker. That ship doesn't represent commerce. It's a psychopomp, a vessel to carry the king's soul. The scroll was his boarding pass. Political context deepens the mystery. Eshmunazar died young, possibly poisoned, and his successor's name was conspicuously erased from monuments. The scroll's middle section, still too corroded to read fully, contains clusters of symbols matching diplomatic tablets from Egypt's 26th dynasty. Was this a secret treaty, a list of enemies, or instructions for a ritual to ensure the king's lineage survived? What emerges is a portrait of power under siege. The Silver Scroll wasn't just a message, it was contingency planning at its most primal, a ruler's last attempt to control the narrative from beyond the grave. Every symbol pressed into that metal whispers the same truth. In Phoenicia, even death couldn't break a king's grip on his secrets. Beneath the dust of Carthage's ruined harbors, archaeologists uncovered a shattered clay tablet that cracked open a hidden chapter of Phoenician commerce. Unlike the ritualistic codes of Byblos or the royal Silver Scroll, this fragmented ledger speaks the language of pure business. Rows of symbols scratched hastily beside quantities of goods, a snapshot of ancient capitalism in action. Preserved by the very fire that destroyed the city during Rome's brutal conquest, the tablet's baked surface lists treasures that built empires: 40 jars of Tyrian purple, 200 measures of cedar oil, and something more enigmatic, 12 units of ashachicamem, a term still debated today. Was this a rare spice, a coded reference to slaves, or proof of trade in something historians never guessed the Phoenicians trafficked? The ledger's layout reveals a meticulous system. Goods are grouped by origin, with cargo from Cyprus, Sicily, and even the Atlantic coast of Morocco appearing in distinct sections. Each entry pairs symbols resembling simplified hieroglyphs with tally marks, some crossed out and corrected as if updated mid-voyage. Dr. Sofia Ramirez, who led the excavation, notes the urgency in these marks. You can almost see the merchant's hand shaking as he adjusted numbers, balancing supply against demand. This wasn't just record-keeping, it was high-stakes arithmetic under the pressure of storms and pirates. What makes this tablet revolutionary isn't just its contents, but its context. Found in the ruins of a dockside warehouse, it dates to Carthage's peak, when the city controlled trade from Spain to Libya. The cedar oil listed matches chemical traces found in Egyptian mummies, proving Phoenician middlemen funneled Lebanese timber south. The purple dye quantities align with royal orders from Persia, where kings demanded the color for robes no commoner could afford, but the real bombshell. A single line referencing 20 casks from beyond the pillars, long thought to mean Britain. If deciphered correctly, it pushes back proven Mediterranean contact with the British Isles by centuries. Yet the ashachicamem mystery lingers. Some linguists link it to the Hebrew shemam, meaning oil, possibly a rare frankincense blend. Others point to Ugaritic texts where ashachicamem denotes celestial charts, suggesting navigational data sold as fiercely as spices. The darkest theory comes from comparative tablets found in Sardinia, where similar symbols appear beside skeletons in chains. Could Carthage's wealth have relied on trafficking humans alongside dyes and timber? This ledger does more than list goods. It paints the Phoenicians as the Amazon of antiquity, master logisticians who turned the Mediterranean into a conveyor belt, their codes functioning like modern barcodes. Each symbol was a contract, each tally marked a heartbeat of an economy so vast, its echoes still shape our world. And somewhere in those broken lines lies a truth we're only beginning to grasp. Commerce, then as now, was never just about what's bought and sold. It's about who controls the code. Tyrian purple wasn't just a color, it was power distilled into dye, a liquid luxury so rare it became the ultimate status symbol of the ancient world. The ledger from Carthage lists 40 jars of it, a quantity that would have required the harvest of nearly 400,000 murex sea snails, each squeezed for a single precious drop of glandular secretion. This wasn't merely labor-intensive, it was an industry shrouded in such secrecy that classical authors like Pliny the Elder could only guess at its methods, describing vats of rotting shellfish so foul-smelling that dye workshops stood downwind of cities. Yet the Phoenicians' real innovation wasn't just production, it was control. By restricting knowledge to a handful of families in Tyre and Sidon, they turned purple into a monopoly, its formula guarded like state secrets. The process began on rocky Mediterranean shores, where workers pried murex snails from tidal crevices at dawn, a task so grueling skeletal remains showed telltale spinal deformities from years of bending. The snail's hypobranchial glands were extracted alive, their milky fluid exposed to sunlight for a chemical metamorphosis, first yellow, then green, finally settling into that legendary deep violet red. But the true alchemy lay in consistency. Phoenician dyers mastered gradients from royal purple, almost black, to amethyst bloom, lighter, mixed with other mollusks, allowing clients to broadcast rank through shade. A single pound of finished dye could cost 3 times a laborer's yearly wages, equivalent today to selling a Ferrari's worth of fabric in one bolt. Why such obsession? Color psychology played its part. In nature, rich purples appear almost exclusively in sunsets and rare flowers, making them visually arresting. But Phoenician marketing genius tied it to divinity. Their myths claimed Hercules' dog first discovered the dye by chewing snails on Tyre's beach, linking it to gods and heroes. Egyptian pharaohs wrapped mummies in purple linen to mimic Osiris' skin. Persian kings reserved it for royal insignia. Rome later made it treason for anyone but emperors to wear full purple togas. The Carthage ledgers, 40 jars, likely supplied such elites, each shipment escorted by armed guards to prevent piracy or adulteration. Yet beyond economics, the dye's cultural footprint reveals darker truths. The stench of production clung to Phoenician traders like a signature, a blend of rotting shellfish and urine used as a mordant. Roman writers mocked them as the purple people, their hands permanently stained from handling vats. But this was deliberate branding. That lingering odor proved authenticity, distinguishing true Tyrian purple from cheaper imitations made from lichen or madder root. The scent became a sensory trademark, announcing Phoenician cargo before ships even docked. The Carthage ledger's greatest revelation might be what's missing. No records specify whether snails were harvested, only that the dye came from the mother cities. Modern marine biologists note murex populations crashed near Tyre by the 4th century before Common Era, suggesting overharvesting so extreme it forced collectors to sail further, possibly to Atlantic coasts. The Phoenicians may have been history's first industrial ecologists, aware their golden goose was finite. They adjusted recipes, stretching each batch with mineral additives, even recycling cloth scraps to extract residual dye. Waste was unthinkable when every drop represented days of perilous labor. What survives today is more than pigment. It's a testament to how perception shapes value. Tyrian purple's allure wasn't just in its hue, but in its story of danger, rarity, and divine favor. When Roman emperors draped themselves in it, they weren't just wearing a color. They were cloaking themselves in the mystique of Phoenician ingenuity, a legacy stitched into the very fabric of power. And somewhere in that Carthage ledger, between lines for cedar and grain, lies the ghost of that empire, not in gold or silver, but in the slow, meticulous counting of snails. Off the jagged coast of Malta, where the Mediterranean's blue stretches into eternity, a storm once tossed a diver against a submerged ledge, a collision that cracked open a secret. Wedged between barnacled rocks lay a flat stone fragment, its edges worn smooth by centuries of currents, but its surface startlingly crisp, a grid of symbols carved with surgical precision. At first glance, it resembled a game board, perhaps an ancient ancestor of backgammon, but the markings told a darker story. This wasn't leisure, it was a plea or maybe a threat. The Malta stone fragment, as it's now known, holds what might be the Phoenicians' most chilling code, a whisper from sailors who knew Malta not as a sunlit paradise, but as a limbo between life and death. Malta's strategic position made it the perfect Phoenician pit stop, a rocky oasis midway between Carthage and Sicily's riches, but the island was more than a resupply hub. Temple complexes like Tas Silg, built atop even older megalithic shrines, show the Phoenicians grafted their gods onto local ones, blending Baal with Malta's ancient earth deities. The stone fragment found just offshore from these temples mirrors this fusion. Its symbols mix classic Phoenician merchant marks with spirals reminiscent of Malta's prehistoric art, a cultural mashup etched in stone. What does it say? Linguists are torn. Some sequences match known Phoenician harbor notations, possibly marking safe anchorages or freshwater springs. But the central cluster, a starburst of lines radiating from a hollow dot, matches nothing in the archaeological record. Dr. Giulia Mifsud, who first analyzed the stone, believes it's a curse. The dot represents Malta itself, a bullseye for misfortune. The lines, they're vectors of danger, shoals, pirates, or storms. She points to similar symbols on Sardinian curse tablets, where sailors paid priests to hex rival ships. Others, like epigrapher Dr. Paul Rifolo, argue it's a prayer, a sailor's offering to Malta's twin guardian goddesses, Astarte and Tanit. The hollow dot, he suggests, is a womb symbol, begging for safe passage as if the sea itself were a mother to be appeased. The stone's physical state tells its own tale. One edge is charred, hinting it survived a shipwreck's fire. Another bears deep grooves, as if it was once nailed to a mast or cabin wall, a talisman against the deep. Most haunting is its size, small enough to fit in a palm. This wasn't a public monument, it was personal, clutched in some sailor's hand as waves battered the hull. Malta's role as a waypoint magnifies the stone's mystery. Phoenician ships stopping here weren't just trading goods, they were exchanging fears, myths, and warnings. The fragment might be a snapshot of that intangible cargo, a message passed between crews like a maritime chain letter. Perhaps its code wasn't meant to stand alone, but to be read alongside other stones scattered like breadcrumbs across the Mediterranean. Today, the fragment sits in Valletta's National Museum of Archaeology, displayed beside Phoenician anchors and amulets. But unlike those polished relics, the stone feels unsettled, its message still coiled tight. Every symbol is a locked door, and behind them, either a blessing or a warning or both. Because in the Phoenician world, the line between prayer and curse was as thin as Malta's horizon, where the sea meets the sky in a shimmer of uncertainty. The Malta stone fragment's cryptic grid doesn't just defy translation, it splits scholars into warring camps, each convinced the symbol's pulse with either salvation or damnation. On one side, protection theorists point to nearly identical markings found on amulets in the Temple of Astarte at Kishon, where sailors once pressed offerings against the goddess's feet before voyages. These artifacts, often inscribed with phrases like "guide my path," suggest the Malta symbols could be a condensed prayer, a sailor's attempt to carry divine favor in his pocket. The fragment's charred edge might even support this. If fire threatened the ship, tossing a sacred stone overboard could have been a last-ditch plea for mercy from the gods. But critics of this blessing theory highlight something grimmer: a collection of lead curse tablets discovered near Cadiz, Spain, etched with strikingly similar grids. These tablets, nailed to temple walls or sunk in harbors, were meant to bind enemies' ships to misfortune. One recovered near a Phoenician shipwreck explicitly curses a rival captain. May his sails shred like cobwebs, his hull split like rotten fruit. If the Malta stone follows this tradition, its symbols might not be a plea for safety, but a weapon hurled into the sea to hex competitors. The debate grows even murkier when you consider cultural crosscurrents. Malta's pre-Phoenician inhabitants, the mysterious temple builders, left behind spiral carvings eerily like the stone's central starburst, were Phoenician sailors appropriating local magic, blending their gods with older powers. Or was this a warning to steer clear of Malta's shores unless you knew the right rituals? Maritime archaeologist Dr. Henrik Vella notes that sailors often carried dual-purpose artifacts, objects that could bless or curse depending on circumstance. Think of it like a medieval dagger, he explains. Same blade protects your neck or slits a rival's throat. The intent lies in the hand, not the steel. Then there's the chilling third option. The stone wasn't meant for humans at all. In Ugaritic texts, certain grids served as gate markers, instructions for spirits to open or block passages between worlds. If the Malta fragment follows this logic, its symbols might have been a bribe to see demons, a way to pay tolls for safe passage through haunted waters. Modern divers report an odd detail. The stone was found near a submarine cave system where currents create eerie, flute-like sounds. Coincidence? Or was this spot chosen because the Phoenicians heard those same ghostly notes and believed the cave's mouth led to the underworld? What's certain is that the stone's power, whether holy or unholy, outlasted its makers. Even today, Maltese fishermen hang replicas in their boats, a tradition passed down through generations. Some say it brings luck, others whisper it keeps darker things at bay. Maybe both are true, because in the Phoenician world, the line between blessing and curse was as thin as the horizon, and sometimes the only way to survive the sea was to speak its language in symbols sharper than any blade. Near the ancient harbor of Cadiz, where the Atlantic's fury meets the Mediterranean's calm, stone markers rise from the cliffs like silent sentinels. These weathered monoliths, carved with looping symbols and staggered in precise intervals, might seem like random rock formations to the untrained eye. But to a Phoenician captain navigating the strait's murderous currents, they were a lifeline, a coded roadmap etched in stone. Each marker, positioned at sightlines from the next, forms a chain leading ships safely past submerged reefs and whirlpools that claimed countless vessels. The real genius lies in their symbology, not just warnings but a language of the sea, blending celestial patterns with tidal secrets only Phoenician pilots could fully decipher. Modern archaeologists mapping these markers made a startling discovery. Using drone surveys and three-dimensional reconstructions of Cadiz's ancient coastline, they realized the stones align with a lost constellation, a mariner's compass formed by stars now obscured by light pollution. One marker near Cape Trafalgar bears a spiral symbol matching descriptions of the Phoenician star god Resheph, believed to govern safe passages. Another, found half-submerged in tidal flats, shows a series of wavy lines beneath a crescent, a code possibly correlating moon phases with the strait's most deceptive currents. These weren't mere signposts, they were geolocated textbooks teaching generations of sailors how to cheat death where the oceans collide. The most revealing marker stands atop a crumbling watchtower at Cadiz's northern approach. Its surface is divided into quadrants, each containing symbols now recognized as hydrodynamic equations in pictographic form. One quadrant shows fish swimming against a diagonal line, a warning about counter-currents strong enough to stall ships. Another depicts a zigzag beside a dotted circle, likely indicating eddies near the harbor mouth, but the lower half holds the real shock, a grid of dots matching the seasonal migration of tuna schools, proof the Phoenicians didn't just navigate waters, they predicted them, turning fish behavior into a living almanac. Why go to such lengths? Cadiz was the gateway to Atlantis, or at least that's what the Greeks believed when they heard Phoenician tales of lands beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Control this passage and you controlled the flow of Atlantic tin, African gold, and Iberian silver. The lifeblood of Mediterranean trade, the marker's precision suggests they were a state secret maintained by an elite guild of pilots. Even today, local fishermen swear some stones hum when certain tides pass, as if vibrating with ancient knowledge. Science dismisses this as wind whistling through erosion holes. But stand there at dusk when the waves echo against the cliffs, and it's easy to imagine those markers still whispering, urging ships onward or tolling their doom. Those Cadiz markers weren't just primitive signposts, they were the ancient world's version of GPS, a system so precise it would make modern navigators pause. Picture this, a Phoenician ship approaching the strait under moonless skies, its pilot squinting at cliffside stones barely visible in torchlight. Each marker's symbols corresponded to celestial patterns memorized since childhood, while the spacing between them acted like nautical mile markers. This wasn't guesswork, it was geoengineering on a grand scale, turning the landscape itself into a living chart. Compare that to today's satellite navigation. Modern sailors rely on atomic clocks and orbiting satellites, but the principle remains eerily similar: reference points creating an invisible grid across the Earth. The Phoenicians just used what they had: stars, stones, and an intimate knowledge of currents. Their markers even accounted for tidal shifts, something contemporary boys only began doing with computerized sensors. Dr. Elena Navarro's team proved this by recreating a voyage using only the stones as guides. Their ship hit every safe channel within meters, despite 2,000 years of coastal erosion altering the shoreline. What's truly revolutionary is how these markers anticipated problems modern tech still struggles with. Take signal drift, the bane of electronic GPS, where underwater topography or solar flares skew coordinates. Phoenician markers avoided this by being physical, immutable. A stone couldn't malfunction, and unlike satellite signals blocked by storms, their symbols were readable in any weather. Even their maintenance was ingenious. Divers found chisel marks at the base of several markers, indicating regular adjustments for sedimentation, a manual version of today's GPS software updates. Yet the most striking parallel lies in redundancy. Just as modern systems cross-check between satellites, ground stations, and inertial navigation, the Phoenicians layered their guidance. Cliff markers aligned with star positions, which aligned with seasonal fish migrations, which aligned with oral sailing hymns passed down through generations. Lose one reference and two others kept you on course. It was a networked navigation system millennia before the internet. The real lesson: precision doesn't require microchips. Those weathered stones held data dense as any QR code, their symbols compressing centuries of observation into a single glance. And while we've swapped chisels for touchscreens, the goal remains unchanged: to slice through the chaos of the sea with lines only the initiated can follow. The Phoenicians didn't just sail the Mediterranean, they programmed it one stone at a time. The Beirut Cargo Manifest doesn't just list goods, it tells a tragedy. Found wedged between volcanic rocks near the ancient port, this cracked pottery shard bears a hurried inscription: 38 amphorae of olive oil, 15 sacks of Lebanese cedar resin, 8 crates of blown glass from Sidon, and then nothing. The final entry trails off mid-sentence, the scribe's stylus leaving a jagged gouge as if ripped from their hand. Archaeologists dated the shard to the late 9th century before Common Era, a period when maritime logs from Ugarit describe freak storms battering the Levantine coast. One account mentions a great wind that tore ships from their anchors like petals from a stem, a tempest that might have sent this vessel to the seabed with its cargo still lashed tight. The manifest's true power lies in its ordinariness. Unlike ceremonial codes or royal decrees, this is the paperwork of everyday trade, scribbled by a merchant or quartermaster who never imagined their tally would become a time capsule. The handwriting is rushed but precise, with symbols crammed near the shard's edges to maximize space, proof this was working document, not art. Residue analysis revealed traces of myrrh clinging to the clay, suggesting it sat near perfume jars in the hold. Even the break pattern tells a story. Fractures radiate from a central impact point, consistent with being dashed against rocks rather than slowly eroded. But the crew's fate emerges when you cross-reference the cargo with climate data. Core samples from nearby seabeds show a thick layer of volcanic ash deposited around the same period, likely from Italy's Mount Etna. Historical eruptions there triggered Mediterranean-wide weather chaos, including tsunamis and rogue waves. The manifest's glass cargo offers another clue. Sidonian glassmakers used a cobalt blue tint requiring calm, windless conditions to prevent bubbles. Shipping such fragile goods during storm season, unthinkable unless desperate. Perhaps this was a gamble to beat competitors or settle debts, a fatal race against the clouds. Maritime insurance didn't exist yet, but Phoenician merchants had their own safeguards. The manifest includes a curious notation beside the cedar resin, 3 vertical lines crossed by a single horizontal stroke. It matches symbols found on insurance tablets from Carthage, indicating goods partially paid for a layaway plan for ancient traders. If the ship sank, the loss would have crippled multiple investors, sparking lawsuits chiseled into stone at Tyre's merchant courts. Modern simulations reconstruct the disaster. Laden with heavy amphorae, the ship would have ridden low in the water. When the storm hit, waves likely smashed the glass first, its shards cutting ropes holding the oil jars. As cargo shifted, the resin sacks, flammable as gunpowder, might have ignited from friction or a stray lamp. The crew's last moments, trapped between a burning deck and a raging sea, their manifest washing ashore as the only witness. Today, the shard sits in Beirut's Maritime Museum, displayed beside a replica of the ship it doomed. Visitors peer at its symbols, not realizing they're reading a eulogy. Every scratched line whispers the same truth. The Mediterranean wasn't just a highway for the Phoenicians. It was a partner that could turn predator in an instant, rewarding courage with trade winds or swallowing whole fleets without a trace. And in that broken pottery, we hear the echo of a lesson every sailor knew. The sea keeps its secrets, but sometimes it lets a few wash ashore. The ship's final voyage likely began under clear skies in Sidon's bustling harbor, its hull heavy with goods destined for a distant buyer, perhaps a Greek nobleman eager for Phoenician glass or an Egyptian official stockpiling cedar resin for embalming. Modern maritime archaeologists have traced probable routes using trade winds recorded in ancient logs, suggesting this vessel hugged the coast toward Cyprus before swinging west toward Crete. Its path wasn't random. Deep grooves worn into the hull's keel, visible in sonar scans, indicate frequent stops at way stations like Tyre and Ashkelon, where crews swapped cargo and news. But the manifest's last entry unfinished, abrupt points to catastrophe, striking somewhere between Cyprus and the Anatolian coast, where seabed cores reveal a layer of volcanic ash thicker than anywhere else in the Mediterranean. Climate models paint a grim picture of that day. Mount Etna's eruption would have sent a plume of ash high into the atmosphere, triggering violent downdrafts over the water. Sailors called these sudden storms the breath of the sea god, winds strong enough to snap masts like twigs. The ship, laden with amphorae, would have wallowed low in the water, its maneuverability crippled. Then came the waves, not the regular swells of a winter gale, but the chaotic, cross-hatched surges of a volcanic weather event. Cargo shifts first, glass crates topple, their shards slicing through rope lashings. Olive oil jugs break loose, their contents spilling into the bilge, making the deck slick as ice. The crew's last acts survive in the archaeology. A bronze dagger found near the wreck site bears notches matching those on Sidonian emergency tools, likely used to cut away rigging as the ship foundered. Charred fragments of cedar resin sacks suggest someone tried to dump flammable cargo overboard, but the wind hurled embers back on board. Most haunting is the distribution of the wreck itself. Unlike ships claimed by storms or piracy, which often sink intact, this vessel's debris field stretches nearly a mile, as if the hull exploded mid-plunge. Volcanic pumice embedded in the timbers confirms the culprit, a pyroclastic surge skimming the sea's surface, superheating the air until the very water boiled. Yet even in disaster, the Phoenicians' ingenuity shines. Among the wreckage, divers recovered a small wooden box, its interior lined with lead inside. A clay token incised with the same symbols as the Beirut manifest, a primitive, black box, meant to survive even if the ship didn't. This wasn't just record-keeping, it was a system. Every crate, every jar, every life had a code, a way to be accounted for long after the sea closed overhead. Today, the ship's fragments lie scattered beneath 40 meters of water, but its story isn't over. By overlaying climate data, cargo lists, and hull markings, archaeologists have reconstructed not just a tragedy, but a testament. These sailors didn't vanish. They left behind a mosaic of clues: carbonized timber, scattered weights, a single silver earring tangled in fishing nets 2 centuries later. Each piece whispering how far they traveled, how hard they fought, and how deeply the sea's fury could rewrite human plans. The codes they carved were more than symbols, they were lifelines thrown across time, begging us to listen. Arwad Island, a rocky fortress just off the coast of Syria, holds a secret that shatters our image of Phoenicians as mere traders. Beneath the ruins of its ancient harbor, archaeologists uncovered a bronze plaque no larger than a handspan, its surface crammed with jagged symbols arranged in tight, marching rows. At first glance, it looked like another cargo list until linguists noticed the repeating clusters. Groups of 7 marks, followed by a slashed symbol resembling a sickle, then a sequence of dots. This wasn't inventory, it was payroll. The Arwad cryptogram, as it's now known, appears to be a mercenary's contract, proof that the Phoenicians didn't just move goods, they traded in soldiers, brokering wars like spices or silver. The plaque's language is blunt. Transliterated symbols spell out quantities of grain, silver shekels, and most chillingly, service under the red banner, a phrase found in Hittite texts describing battlefield oaths. One line reads, 40 measures per moon, half when the bow is strung, likely meaning half payment upfront, the rest after combat, but the real revelation is the names. Nestled between payment terms are glyphs matching royal seals from Byblos, Sidon, and even distant Cyprus, suggesting these mercenaries weren't rogue fighters but a coalition bankrolled by multiple city-states. This wasn't a petty skirmish, it was a calculated alliance with Arwad as the mustering point. Why Arwad? The island's geography made it perfect for clandestine deals. Just 2 miles offshore, its harbors were easily defended, while its position between Anatolia and Egypt placed it at the crossroads of empires. Hittite records mention sea mercenaries garrisoned here, and Egyptian reliefs depict Arwadite ships with distinct crescent-shaped prow ornaments, the same symbol etched into the plaque. But the cryptogram hints at something darker. Those slashed sickle marks, they appear beside each city-state's seal, possibly indicating blood oaths or penalties for desertion. One fragmentary section warns of teeth of the sea for those who break contract, a phrase later found in Carthaginian treaties referring to naval executions. The mercenaries themselves remain shadowy, but grave sites on the island offer clues. Excavations revealed skeletons buried with a mix of Cypriot daggers, Aegean helmets, and scarabs from the Nile Delta, a mercenary's suitcase of plunder. Isotope analysis showed some men hailed as far north as the Caucasus, likely sold into service by slave traders. Others bore dental patterns common in Sardinia, where Phoenicians recruited famed Balearic slingers. These were the human cogs in a machine that turned gold into victory, and the plaque was its instruction manual. What reshapes history isn't just the cryptogram's existence, but its timing. Dated to the 12th century before Common Era, it coincides with the Bronze Age collapse when empires crumbled under mysterious sea peoples. Scholars have long suspected Phoenician cities profited from the chaos. Now we have proof they helped orchestrate it, leasing killers to the highest bidder. The Arwad cryptogram doesn't just record a contract, it exposes the shadow economy behind antiquity's apocalypse, where the price of a kingdom's fall was carefully calculated in silver and grain. And somewhere in those corroded symbols lies a truth we're only beginning to grasp. The Mediterranean's first free market wasn't for goods, it was for war. The Arwad cryptogram's payment terms reveal a financial sophistication that rivals modern payroll systems, except instead of direct deposits, these mercenaries were paid in silver shekels measured to the grain. One line specifies 30 per moon for the bow arm, 20 for the shield, a tiered pay scale reflecting combat roles. Bowmen, likely requiring years of training, earned a premium, while frontline infantry received subsistence wages. But what's truly startling is the clause about half-weight in foreign lands, meaning payments were adjusted for local currency values. Phoenician quartermasters didn't just move goods across borders, they calculated exchange rates for hired blades. Compare this to other ancient military economies. Assyrian records from Nimrud detail similar contracts, but with a key difference: their mercenaries were paid in land grants rather than silver. The Hittites preferred barter weapons for service, armor for loyalty. Yet the Phoenician system was liquid, flexible, designed for soldiers who might fight for Tyre one season and Egypt the next. The cryptogram even includes what might be history's first documented signing bonus: 5 shekels upon the mark, payable when a fighter pressed their seal into the clay tablet witness list. But metals weren't the only currency. The plaque's references to grain in the 5th month and wine at the turning of the year hint at a seasonal payment structure tied to harvests and trade winds. Summer campaigns coincided with grain shipments from Egypt, while winter installments came in wine from Crete, commodities as reliable as coin. Archaeologists found amphory stamps in Arwad's warehouses matching the cryptogram's delivery dates, proving these weren't promises scratched in bronze. They were invoices backed by real warehouses bursting with goods. The system's weakest link, trust, a scratched-out line near the plaque's edge, warns against false counts at the scales, suggesting some quartermasters shaved silver or diluted grain. Forensic accounting isn't new. Residue on the plaque shows repeated erasures and corrections, likely when payments were audited. One mercenary's skeleton found on the island still clutched a lead tally tag in its fist, etched with the same sickle symbol from the cryptogram. Perhaps it was a receipt, or maybe a death warrant for the paymaster who cheated him. What emerges isn't just a payroll. It's a shadow economy where life and loyalty had exact prices, where a shekel's weight could mean the difference between a throne kept and a kingdom lost. And in those weathered symbols, we see the unspoken truth of ancient power. Empires weren't just built on trade and temples. They ran on mercenary math, where every drop of blood had a number and every war came with a ledger. Scattered across shipwrecks from Spain to Lebanon, peculiar copper ingots tell a silent story of ancient industry, each one stamped with angular symbols resembling tree branches or lightning bolts. These aren't random markings, they're the Cyprus Copper Code, a standardized system that turned raw metal into the Phoenician equivalent of branded currency. The most revealing examples come from the Cape Gelidonia wreck off Turkey's coast, where ingots lay stacked like dominoes, their surfaces bearing identical punches. At first glance, they might look like quality control marks until you spot the same symbols on temple receipts in Cyprus and merchant ledgers from Memphis. This wasn't just factory branding, it was an entire economic language forged in fire. The code's genius lay in its simplicity. A single vertical line with 3 crossbars indicated first-grade copper, smelted from the rich ore of Cyprus's Troodos Mountains. A zigzag pattern marked batches alloyed with tin for bronze, while a circle bisected by a slash warned of impurities needing refinement. Archaeologists found these symbols repeated on molds at mining sites like Skouria, where slag heaps still tower over the landscape. But the real breakthrough came when researchers analyzed ingots from unrelated wrecks. Their symbols matched down to the chisel's millimeter-thick groove. These weren't just notes for local smiths, they were universal stamps recognizable from Nile docks to Sardinian foundries. Why such precision? Copper was the oil of the Bronze Age, fueling everything from weapons to sacred statues. Cyprus's mines supplied nearly half the Mediterranean's demand, but raw ore varied wildly in quality. Phoenician merchants couldn't afford buyers doubting their product mid-voyage. The code solved this by turning ingots into self-contained certificates. A trader in Crete could glance at a symbol and know exactly how many votive figurines or sword blades that lump of metal would yield, no translator needed. The system's sophistication becomes clear when you track specific symbols. One ingot recovered near Gaza bears a branch-like mark linked to temple workshops in Byblos, where artisans prized Cypriot copper for its soft glow when polished. Another found off Sicily shows a dot cluster corresponding to inventory lists from Carthage armories, suggesting military contracts. Most telling are the X symbols found only on ingots near shipwrecks, likely denoting emergency jettison cargo, meant to be identified and reclaimed later. But the Cyprus Code's real legacy wasn't in trade, it was in trust. For the first time, raw materials carried their own resumes, their value locked into symbols anyone could read. That trust built empires. When Assyrian kings demanded tribute, they specified payment in marked copper. When Egyptian pharaohs commissioned statues, contracts required metal of the three branches. The Phoenicians hadn't just standardized a product, they'd invented a language of value that outlasted languages themselves, whispering across millennia in the silent code of fire-forged symbols. The Cyprus Copper Code didn't just streamline Phoenician trade, it rewired the entire Bronze Age economy, turning scattered kingdoms into interlocking cogs of a machine hungry for metal. Take the infamous Sea Peoples, those marauders who toppled empires from Hattusa to Thebes. Historians long painted them as mindless destroyers, but the Copper Trail tells a different story. Wreck sites along the Anatolian coast reveal something startling. Ingots bearing Phoenician marks in the cargo holds of so-called invader ships. These weren't just looted prizes. Chemical analysis matches them to Cyprus mines active decades after the Hittite collapse, proof that somebody kept the smelters firing through the chaos. The shocking truth, the Sea Peoples weren't just raiders, they were customers. Phoenician merchants played both sides of the apocalypse. Ledgers from Ugarit show copper shipments to northern warriors, spiking just before the city's destruction, while Egyptian reliefs depict captured Sea Peoples wielding swords of unmistakably Cypriot alloy. It's no coincidence that the only Mediterranean powers to survive the Bronze Age collapse, Egypt, Phoenicia, and Assyria, were those controlling metal networks. The Phoenicians didn't just survive the storm, they fed it, trading copper for protection or perhaps profiting from the desperation of crumbling states. But the code's reach stretched beyond war. At a Mycenaean palace in Pylos, archaeologists found tablets scribbled with linear B symbols suspiciously similar to the Phoenician copper marks. One lists 3 ingots of the forked sign, matching cargo from a wrecked Phoenician trader off Crete. This wasn't imitation, it was interoperability. Like modern container shipping codes, the symbols became a lingua franca for smiths from Greece to Mesopotamia. Even the biblical Book of Kings mentions Solomon's temple using marked copper, likely stamped with those same branch-like glyphs from Cyprus. The system's collapse reveals as much as its peak. Around 1050 before Common Era, ingot symbols abruptly simplify, then vanish. The reason: iron. As furnace technology advanced, harder, cheaper iron replaced bronze for tools and weapons. Yet in a twist of irony, the Phoenicians' own copper code may have sped its demise. Standardization had made metal markets so efficient that demand outpaced Cyprus's mines, forcing experimentation with alternatives. Those cryptic symbols didn't just fuel an age, they helped birth the next one, leaving behind a metallic paper trail whispering of an economy far more connected than we ever imagined. Off the rocky coast of Sardinia, where the Mediterranean's sapphire waters give way to deep sea trenches, a fisherman once hauled up more than his daily catch, a smooth, palm-sized stone. its edges worn by centuries of tides, but its surface etched with symbols so deliberate they couldn't be mistaken for weathering. This wasn't just a net weight, it was a cipher, a relic of the Phoenicians' secret reign over Sardinia's fishing grounds. Dubbed the Fisherman's Stone, its markings, a series of crossed lines and concentric circles, appear random until you overlay them with underwater topography. Suddenly, they align with submerged seamounts where tuna schools gather seasonally, revealing the stone's true purpose, a coded map to the Mediterranean's richest harvests. Sardinia wasn't just another colony for the Phoenicians, it was their larder. The island's nutrient-rich currents attracted fish in biblical numbers, turning its waters into a gold mine for salted tuna and garum, the fermented fish sauce prized from Rome to Babylon. But fishing here wasn't as simple as casting nets. Local currents could swallow boats whole, and rival Greek and Etruscan fleets prowled the margins. The Fisherman's Stone offered a solution. Its symbols, when compared with similar stones found near ancient processing plants at Nora and Tharos, form a grid, crossed lines marking dangerous eddies, circles signaling spawning grounds, and cryptic dots that might denote hidden reefs or pirate ambush points. What's astonishing is the precision. Modern sonar maps confirm the Phoenicians' knowledge of underwater features invisible from the surface. Submerged volcanoes where plankton bloomed, attracting fish, or canyon walls that funneled migrating swordfish into narrow corridors. The stones weren't just guides, they were trade secrets carved in basalt. Fishermen likely passed them down through generations, their meanings guarded like state secrets. But Sardinia's true value lay in its position. Midway between Carthage and the Iberian silver mines, it was the perfect pit stop for ships needing provisions. The Phoenicians didn't just take fish, they weaponized scarcity. Accounts from Greek traders complain of being forced to pay exorbitant prices for Sardinian-caught tuna, hinting at a coordinated effort to control supply. The Fisherman's Stone symbols even appear on lead ingots from the island's mines, suggesting fish and metals were part of the same economic machine. Yet the stones also hint at a darker truth. Some bear not just navigational marks but short phrases in Phoenician like "mouth of hunger" or "tears of the sea." These might reference brutal working conditions in the garum factories, where vats of decomposing fish were tended by slaves. Others speculate they're warning Sardinia's waters were notorious for sudden squalls, and one stone found near a shipwreck site bears a single symbol, a spiral, the Phoenician sign for eternity. Today, these stones sit quietly in museums, their symbols still whispering where the fish run fat and the currents turn deadly. They're more than tools. They're the ledger of an empire built not just on cedar and silver, but on the silent, shimmering bounty of the deep and the coded knowledge of how to claim it. Beneath the surface of those cryptic fishing codes lies a startling possibility. What if the Phoenicians weren't just mapping tuna migrations, but protecting them? The Fisherman's Stone symbols might hold more than navigation clues. Some clusters appear at precise intervals matching modern marine conservation zones where fish spawn undisturbed. One sequence near Tharos shows a crossed circle symbol repeated every seventh line, a possible nod to seasonal bans allowing stocks to recover. Ancient Greek writers mocked Phoenician superstitions about fishing during certain moon phases, but modern ecologists recognize these as lunar spawning cycles. Were these codes not just guides but rules? Evidence mounts in Sardinia's underwater ruins. Excavations at the garum factory of Bithynia revealed stone tablets with symbols nearly identical to the Fisherman's Stone, but paired with numeric notations. One lists 3 hands beside a fish glyph, likely meaning a 3-month closure, perhaps during spawning season. Another shows a triangle crossed by waves, a symbol carbon-dated tuna bones confirm coincides with peak juvenile presence in the area. This wasn't random. Fish vertebrae from Phoenician layers show larger average sizes than in Greek or Roman-era deposits, suggesting sustainable harvesting. The codes might have been ecology in stone, enforcing limits long before the concept of overfishing existed. But who enforced these rules? A broken stele near Nora's harbor depicts a cloaked figure holding a scaled rod, possibly a fisheries inspector. Phoenician contracts from Carthage mention sea judges who settled disputes over net sizes or catch quotas. The penalties were severe. One tablet curses violators with empty nets and rotten sails, while another, found near a wrecked poacher's boat, bears the ominous symbol of a slashed fish. The message was clear: break the code and the sea itself would punish you. The system's sophistication becomes clear when compared to modern practices. Those crossed circle symbols, they align with submarine canyons where, even now, biologists document higher biodiversity. The Phoenicians may not have understood oxygen levels or food chains, but their codes reveal something profound, observation so meticulous it bordered on reverence. They didn't just take from the sea, they listened to it, carving its rhythms into stone to ensure the waves would never run silent. Yet the darkest twist comes from Malta, where a tablet lists fishing quotas beside casualty counts. One line reads, 40 baskets, 12 men lost, hinting at the price of defiance. Venture beyond the coded grounds, and the sea demanded payment in blood. These weren't just environmental codes, they were survival math etched by sailors who knew the truth. Exploit the deep recklessly, and it would exploit you back. High on a windswept cliff near Tyre, where the Atlantic pounds Africa's northern tip, a tomb carved into the bedrock holds a message from beyond death. Unlike the grandiose pyramids of Egypt or the ornate sarcophagi of Sidon, this burial is stark, just a single chamber lined with stone slabs, its walls covered in symbols that twist and loop like serpents frozen mid-strike. The Tyre glyphs, as they're known, aren't just funerary scribbles. They're a cipher guarding the identity of someone important enough to warrant an eternal code. And when Egyptologists first saw them, they staggered back, not because they couldn't read them, but because they recognized them. Here, on the far edge of the known world, were symbols lifted straight from the Egyptian Book of the Dead. The glyph's layout is deliberate. Flanking the tomb's entrance, 2 columns of characters mirror the structure of Egyptian opening of the mouth rituals, spells meant to animate the deceased in the afterlife. But the symbols themselves are pure Phoenician hybridized with hieratic script, as if the scribe couldn't decide which gods to court. One repeating cluster shows a bird with outstretched wings, an echo of Egypt's soul-carrying bird, yet its beak forms the Phoenician letter Aleph. Another sequence pairs the eye of Horus with a crescent moon, the signature of Tanit, Carthage's patron goddess. This wasn't cultural borrowing. It was a spiritual mashup, a plea for salvation written in the linguistic equivalent of a trader's pidgin. But whose soul was so valuable it needed dual passports to the underworld. The tomb's skeletal remains offer clues. Forensic analysis revealed a man in his 40s with a healed spear wound in his femur, consistent with Greek accounts of Phoenician admiralty. More telling were the remnants of purple-stained fabric clinging to his ribs, suggesting a funeral shroud dyed with Tyrian purple, a color reserved for elites. Yet the real smoking gun lies in the glyph's opening sequence, a group of 7 slashes crossed by a single horizontal line, a symbol found only on naval contracts from Carthage. This wasn't just a noble, he was a fleet commander, perhaps the very one who secured Tyre as a strategic outpost. Why the Egyptian touches? Phoenician sailors often worked as mercenaries for the pharaohs, and tomb inscriptions from Memphis describe sea lords of Ritjanu, the Egyptian term for Canaanites receiving funerary rites. This man might have served in Egypt's navy before striking out on his own, blending the rituals of his employers with those of his ancestors. Or perhaps it was insurance hedging his bets in a world where gods, like trade routes, were best kept diversified. The glyph's final lines chill the blood. A series of hooked symbols spirals inward, ending in a sun disk split by a zigzag, a motif matching cursed tablets from the Temple of Melkart in Tyre. Translated tentatively, it warns, "The path is shut to those who bear no mark." Beneath it, the stone is scarred with gouges as if someone tried to erase it. Robbers or a later visitor terrified by what they'd read, what survives is a testament to the Phoenicians' elastic identity. In Egypt, they played by the pharaoh's rules. In Carthage, they bowed to Baal Hammon. But here, at the crossroads of continents, they cobbled together a faith as fluid as their commerce, stitching together gods like trade agreements. The Tanya glyphs don't just name the dead, they confess a truth every Phoenician sailor knew. In life, you serve many masters. In death, you take your chances. The Tanya glyphs don't just encode a name, they map a soul's journey through a shadowy underworld where Phoenician and Egyptian afterlife beliefs collided. In Ugaritic myths from northern Canon, death wasn't an endpoint but a perilous voyage to the House of Dust, a realm ruled by the god Mot, where souls navigated rivers of darkness and battled serpentine guardians. The glyphs' spiraling patterns mirror these myths, particularly the recurring motif of a seven-gated path, where each gate strips the dead of worldly attachments. One sequence on the tomb wall shows a hooked line passing through 7 crescents, a possible nod to this ritual stripping, with each crescent representing a trial overcome. But the Egyptian influence complicates the picture. The Eye of Horus symbol paired with Tanit's crescent suggests a syncretic bargain. The deceased hoped Horus would judge him kindly and Tanit would guide his ship through the afterlife storms. This duality reflects the Phoenicians' pragmatic spirituality. Just as they blended goods in their cargo holds, they mixed gods in their prayers, covering all theological bases. A parallel exists in the Ugaritic tale of Akhat, where the hero's father, Danal, offers sacrifices to both Baal and El, hedging his bets. The Tanya tomb's occupant seems to have taken this further, wielding Egyptian funerary magic like a merchant wields trade licenses tools to smooth passage through hostile territory. The most revealing glyph is the split sun disk, which Ugaritic texts associate with the god Shapash, the torch of the gods. In those myths, Shapash descends nightly into the underworld, illuminating the dead's path. Here, though, the disk is fractured by a zigzag, perhaps representing the Phoenician belief that souls fragmented in death, needing reunification. Supporting this, archaeologists found 7 alabaster jars in the tomb, each containing different colored sands, red for blood, black for decay, white for bones. This echoes Ugaritic burial rites where 7 vessels symbolically reassembled the corpse for its journey. Yet the glyph's true innovation lies in their omissions. Unlike Egyptian tombs crammed with goods for the afterlife, this chamber held only a dagger and a silver coin, one to fight demons, the other to pay the ferryman. This austerity mirrors Ugaritic descriptions of Mot's realm, where kings and beggars alike wander hungry in the dust. The Phoenicians may have borrowed Egypt's symbols, but their vision of death remained starkly Canaanite, egalitarian, bleak, and utterly dependent on coded knowledge to navigate. What emerges isn't just a tomb, but a palimpsest of fear and hope. The glyphs whisper of a soul caught between cultures, stitching together divine favors like a patchwork sail, hoping it would be enough to carry him beyond the edge of the world. And in those silent symbols, we glimpse the Phoenicians' deepest truth. Their greatest voyages weren't across water, but through the dark, on the sun-baked island of Ibiza, where modern partygoers dance atop ancient ruins. A collection of broken pottery holds a different kind of rhythm, a silent symphony of symbols scratched into clay. These aren't random marks, they're the Ibiza pottery codes, a series of cryptic signs etched onto amphorae and jugs that reveal the island's hidden role as a ceramic powerhouse. Unlike the cargo manifests or royal decrees of other Phoenician sites, these symbols feel intimate fingerprints of the artisans who shaped them, a Chinese letter year-old autograph saying, "I made this." The most telling examples come from Sarkaleta, a coastal ruin where archaeologists uncovered kilns surrounded by pottery shards, each bearing variations of the same symbol, a stylized fish with a looping tail. At first, researchers assumed these were ownership marks until they found the same fish on ceramics from Sardinia and Carthage. This wasn't just local notation. It was a brand. Chemical analysis confirmed the clay's unique mineral signature matched Ibiz's western cliffs, proving the island exported its wares across the Mediterranean. But the real breakthrough came when scholars noticed subtle differences in the symbols. One fish had 3 dorsal fins, another a dotted eye. These weren't random flourishes. They matched the workshop layouts at Socaleta, where each kiln sat in its own distinct sector. The 3-finned fish appeared only near Kiln 3, the dotted eye by Kiln 7. This was quality control carved in clay, a way to trace faulty pots back to their makers. Ibiz's ceramics were more than containers, they were currency. The island's porous clay, rich in volcanic ash, made lightweight, durable vessels perfect for shipping olive oil and wine. Symbols like stacked crescents or crossed lines appear to denote capacity, with experimental archaeology confirming a correlation between mark patterns and liquid volume. One amphora stamped with a ladder-like symbol consistently holds 22 liters, while those marked with circles average 15. The Phoenicians didn't just standardize weights and measures, they baked them into the pottery itself. Yet some marks resist functional explanations. A recurring motif, a sun disk cradled in what looks like a pair of hands, appears exclusively on jugs found in graves. Similar symbols adorn temple offerings in Carthage, suggesting Ibiz's potters catered to both the living and the dead. The most haunting example, a child's burial urn etched with a half-finished sun, as if the artisan's hand stopped mid-stroke. Whether due to grief, interruption, or intent, it's a reminder that these codes weren't just about trade, they carried stories too. What makes the Ibiza marks extraordinary isn't their complexity, but their continuity. Centuries after Phoenicia's decline, Roman-era potters on the island were still using variations of the fish symbol, a testament to how deeply these codes seeped into cultural memory. Today, as DJ's spin beats over the same ground where kilns once glowed, those silent symbols endure whispers of an island that didn't just make pottery, but wrote its identity in fire and clay. The Ibiza pottery codes don't just reveal a system of quality control, they expose the shadowy scaffolding of an entire craft guild, one whose influence stretched far beyond the kilns of Socaleta. Look closely at those fish symbols with their varied fins and dotted eyes. What seems like simple branding is actually a complex hierarchy, a coded language of status and specialization. Just as medieval European guilds used marks to distinguish masters from apprentices, the Phoenician symbols appear in escalating complexity, a single dorsal fin for novices, 3 for seasoned artisans, and on rare pieces, a fish crowned with a tiny crescent, perhaps denoting a guild leader or a potter entrusted with sacred funerary ware. Evidence mounts in the ruins of Ibiza's satellite workshops. At Puig des Mollins, a hillside littered with ceramic fragments, researchers found shards marked with partial fish tails without heads or fins crossed out. These might represent practice pieces made by trainees, their flawed work deliberately marred to prevent misuse. Nearby, a kiln's foundation stone bears an incised symbol, 2 fish circling a central dot, a motif identical to Carthaginian guild seals found on contracts for temple votives. This wasn't just casual craftsmanship, it was a regulated industry with tiers of expertise as rigid as any medieval guild hall. The guild's power extended beyond the island. Matching symbols appear on cargo manifests from shipwrecks off Malta and Sardinia, often paired with notations in Phoenician shorthand. One such list, scratched onto a lead tablet near Nora, details 20 jars marked with the eye fish, 10 with the split tail, a clear reference to Ibizan workshops and their graded output. Even more telling are punitive marks. Amphorae from a Marseille wreck show fish symbols defaced by deep gouges, possibly denoting goods rejected by guild inspectors for poor firing or thin walls. But what fueled this system's sophistication? The answer lies beneath Ibiz's limestone cliffs. Unlike mainland pottery centers where clay deposits were plentiful, the island's high-quality volcanic ash clay was a finite resource. Control its use and you controlled the entire production chain. The guild likely decided who could harvest which seams, how much clay each artisan received, even which symbols denoted premium batches. A tablet found in Carthage references the clay allotments of Ebusus, suggesting quotas enforced by maritime authorities. The darkest secrets emerge in the guild's exclusivity. At a mass grave near Sarkalata, skeletons show repetitive stress injuries, swollen finger joints, spinal curvatures consistent with lifelong pottery work. Yet none are buried with the tools of their trade, and only one shard bears a personal mark, a crude fish inside a circle. These may have been the guild's underclass, laborers who mixed clay and stacked kilns but were barred from etching their own symbols. Their anonymous toil built an empire of branded ceramics, yet their hands left no signature. By the time Rome conquered Ibiza in 123 before Common Era, the guild's codes had already begun to fade, replaced by Latin stamps. But echoes lingered. A 1st century Common Era wine amphora found in Pompeii bears a stylized dolphin suspiciously similar to the Phoenician fish, its scales forming tiny loops, perhaps a nod to the old masters whose marks once guaranteed quality across the Mediterranean. The guilds may have vanished, but their lesson endured. In commerce as in clay, trust must be baked into every layer or the whole vessel cracks. At the foot of the Rock of Gibraltar, where the Mediterranean meets the Atlantic, a weathered basalt slab juts from the earth like a broken tooth. Its surface is carved with symbols so sharp they seem to snarl even after 3,000 years. A jagged arrow pointing west, a cluster of dots like raised hackles, and a looping line that might be a noose or a crown. This is the Gibraltar boundary stone, and it wasn't just a marker, it was a threat. The stone's location tells the first half of the story. Perched atop a cliff overlooking the strait, it commanded a view of every ship entering or leaving the Mediterranean. Phoenician traders called this passage the Pillars of Melkart, their name for the twin peaks of Gibraltar and Mount Acho in North Africa. But the stone's symbols reveal a darker truth. These waters weren't just a trade route. They were a battleground. That jagged arrow aligns perfectly with the ancient Tartessian city of Hulva, a rival power controlling Iberia's mineral riches. The dots, archaeologists noticed they match lunar phases recorded in Carthaginian logs, likely warning of seasonal Tartessian patrols. But the looping line is the real key. Comparative studies show identical marks on stelae from Tyre where they denoted death to trespassers. This wasn't diplomacy, it was a maritime kill zone declaration. The Tartessians weren't pushovers. Greek chronicles described them as lords of silver, their warriors clad in gleaming armor fashioned from Iberian mines. Phoenician ships needed Tartessian metals, but direct raids were suicidal. Instead, they played the long game. The boundary stone's carvings include a tiny, almost hidden symbol, a fish with two tails, a code found on ingots from Cadiz denoting contraband. Here, it likely signaled covert deals with Tartessian rebels or smugglers, undercutting the ruling elite. But the stone's true genius lies in its duality. To Phoenician crews, the symbols functioned as navigational cues. The arrow pointed to a hidden anchorage on Gibraltar's leeward side, while the dots corresponded to safe passage tides. To Tartessians, however, it would have read as a divine warning. Melkart's wrath awaited any who crossed. Even the stone's material carried meaning. Basalt, foreign to Gibraltar's limestone geology, was hauled from Carthage as a statement. This land belonged to Phoenicia, no matter whose shore it stood on. A shattered Tartessian dagger found near the stone hints at how enforcement worked. Its blade bears a glyph matching the boundary marker's noose-like loop, likely carved by a Phoenician raider as a trophy. Naval graffiti at Lixus shows similar symbols beside sunk ship diagrams. the message was clear: trespass, and your name would be the next etched in stone or erased from history. What makes the Gibraltar stone unique isn't its brutality, but its brazenness. Most ancient borders relied on natural features like rivers. This was a man-made line in the sand, a gauntlet thrown down with chisel and mallet. And in those weathered symbols, we see the birth of a concept that still shapes our world. That territory isn't just land. It's a story written by whoever holds the sharpest tools and the sharpest wit. From the cryptic spirals of the Byblos Cipher to the mercenary math of the Arwad cryptogram, these 25 codes aren't just puzzles. They're portals into a world where every scratch in clay or stone carried weight. The Tyre Anchor's sacred geometry reveals sailors who saw gods in the waves, while the fisherman's stone maps a silent war between sustenance and survival. Those copper ingots stamped like currency, they turned raw metal into a language of empire, and the Ibiza pottery marks hid an entire guild's hierarchy in the curve of a fish's tail. Even the Silver Scroll, coiled tight with royal secrets, whispers of a culture where power wasn't just won, it was encrypted. But the real magic lies in what these codes don't say. The gaps in translation, the symbols that still defy logic, they're reminders that the Phoenicians mastered something more valuable than trade: ambiguity. A boundary stone could be both a threat and a guide, just as a tuna migration chart might double as a plea to the gods. These weren't people who saw hard lines between commerce and faith, between life and death. To them, the Mediterranean wasn't just water, it was ink, and their ships were the quills that wrote history in riddles. So here's the challenge these codes leave us: crack one and a dozen more bloom. That skeletal hand clutching a paymaster's tally in Arwad, the half-finished sun on a child's urn in Ibiza, they're not just artifacts, they're unanswered questions. Which cipher speaks to you? Is it the star-scarred anchor or the ledger that doomed a ship? Dive into the comments and tell me. If you could whisper to the carver of any one of these codes, what would you ask? The stones have kept their silence for millennia, but the conversation, that's just getting started.